B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, May 2nd, 2018. And if you're looking for coverage of Kanye West's latest ridiculous comments, you're going to have to do a search and click around and find it somewhere else. Today's political scene requires me to cover enough fools already, and I'm not going to widen out to include Kanye. He can handle it on his own. Today, I want to alert you to troubling aspects of the bipartisan authorization for use of military force, which is being compiled in the Senate right now. It has co-sponsors, Tim Kaine of Virginia. He was the Hillary Clinton vice presidential running mate last year, and Bob Corker of Tennessee. He is the lame duck guy who is one of the few Republicans who has been willing to criticize Trump from time to time. And I believe these gentlemen have good intentions. They recognize that we have been working off the blank check that Bush got through Congress right after 9/11 for far too long, and particularly when it applies to groups like the Islamic State that didn't exist in 2001, or Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula. It wasn't there. And so, yes, the law needs updating, and Congress needs to assert its constitutional authority to declare war and to place limits on a president's ability or latitude to conduct military operations. So I want to thank John Swartz, who writes for The Intercept. He did an excellent breakdown of this bill with history of the National Defense Authorization Act from 2012. We covered that in great detail here at this podcast, and if you care to, just do a search at peterbcollins.com under the entries NDAA, and you'll see a series of interviews that I did with attorney Carl Mayer. He won the case. Judge Catherine Forrest declared unconstitutional the broad language of Obama's 2012 NDAA that essentially permitted, with a few, qualifying terms, the president to detain an American at a military base indefinitely without charge or trial if there is some accusation of complicity with terrorist groups. And I was a blistering critic of that law and the way Obama bobbed and weaved on it. In public, he claimed that he was uncomfortable with it, but he sent, very strong messages to, I recall, Dick Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the Senate in particular, saying, no, we want this bill. And who was the former senator from Michigan? Carl, see, when I ad-lib these things, it's risky sometimes. But the Michigan senator who was a very moderate guy and chaired armed services when the Democrats were in control. Anyway, he was a guy who said, really, do you want this? Do you not want it? And he publicly shared the back and forth with the White House during that period. So, the new language in this bill that is still, hasn't even really been debated before committee, would give future presidents the authority to throw American citizens into prison for life without charges or a trial. And the provisions presumably only apply to somebody involved with the 9/11 attacks under the Obama language, but this new bill is so broad that it would allow a president to place in indefinite military detention almost anybody, including any U.S. citizen captured in the United States or not, and hold them without charges, essentially forever. Now, the article suggests that this could be a combination of sloppy drafting and a reluctance to take on the executive branch. But Christopher Anders of the ACLU calls it a legislative dumpster fire. And you remember Jose Padilla? American citizen, lived in Chicago, was held at the Brig in Charleston for many years until the Bush administration moved him into a federal court where, under very murky circumstances, he took a guilty plea. We never saw any of the evidence that they claimed would have convicted him of serious terrorism offenses. Instead, they used really tangential charges and forced a plea deal on a man who we believed was, seriously impaired after being kept in solitary confinement, and he was subjected to some brutal tactics along the way. So the Padilla case is really the most prominent example of the detention of an American indefinitely without charge or trial, and the crisis, at least the legal crisis, ended when the Bush administration quietly moved him into federal court, and he's now at a supermax prison where he will never be heard from again. Now, one of the real issues in trying to clean up the language in these bills is that they'll talk about, the 9/11 AUMF referred to, defined a target as a person who was part of or substantially supported al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces. And that language has been used to include the recently developed terrorist groups, like I mentioned, the Islamic State and al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula, plus all those groups in Africa that we are militarily confronting without any legal authorization from our Congress or the United Nations or anybody else. So the undefined lingo is a serious issue, and Dianne Feinstein tried to clarify that bill. Her clarifying amendment in 2012 was defeated, but they did succeed in inserting language that appeared to protect Americans. That kind of language doesn't appear anywhere in this new Kane and Corker bill. So I want to keep an eye on this, and that's why I led the podcast today with this story. I hope that you will keep tabs on the action that is moving right now. And get this, the bill as it stands would allow the president, including the guy who currently claims the title, to designate additional associated forces to the list. So, if the League of Women Voters of South Bend, Indiana, presents some issue for Trump, he could say, well, you're part of associated forces, and I'm grabbing your leaders and locking you up at a military base without charge or trial. And this all is so bizarre because at the very time that we see Democrats in particular fearing the worst of what Trump could do, they keep giving him more money to fight wars in the Pentagon budget, and in this case, more authority to declare war, to start fights with groups of people who are not currently considered a threat to the United States. And the real capper here is that the Corker-Kane bill has no sunset clause, meaning that once it is passed, it can only be repealed by Congress where supermajorities would likely be required. So this represents a permanent shift of power from the Congress under the Constitution to the President, and I object. We're into day 3 of the information about Bob Mueller's list of questions for Donald Trump, and we've learned more about how all of this developed. There were meetings back in March between Ty Cobb, who, by the way, has just resigned from the Trump legal team in his White House position today. Ty Cobb was running the Happy Talk campaign for Trump, trying to be cooperative, trying not to create new barriers or obstacles. And he did balk during the first meeting at suggestions that Trump should testify. And it appears that Bob Mueller had a double strategy to try to pressure Ty Cobb. One was to feed him the general topics that would be discussed in an interview or a deposition or a grand jury testimony from a sitting president. The other was a not-so-veiled threat that if the president didn't voluntarily agree to an interview with Mueller's investigators, that he would issue a subpoena for the president to appear before a grand jury. Now, this goes back to the Clinton attempt at impeachment. He was impeached by the House. The Senate did not vote to remove him. But during that process, Bill Clinton was subpoenaed to appear before a grand jury, and he ducked the subpoena by changing his mind and agreeing to appear before that grand jury without the subpoena. This means that that issue has not been tested in the courts, and Trump could take it to court, which, of course, would delay any progress in that direction. So I still am uncomfortable with Mueller sharing even the general idea of the questions with Trump in advance. I do believe it's like an open book exam. And I also believe that this is some way to try to seduce Trump into a trap. We're going to get to some commentary on that in just a moment. So after John Dowd quit in March, and he was one of the people on the team who strongly advised Trump not to sit for an interview. And, of course, Trump has made these public statements where he really, 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 really wants to talk to Mueller if the lawyers will let him. And so he is straddling on that matter. And, of course, if I were his attorney, I would say, Donnie boy, don't even think about it. You are such a compulsive liar and bullshitter that you will only get yourself in deeper if you agree to face questions from the special counsel. And some people who've been posting on a Facebook feed that I set up after the Mueller questions were released speculate that Rudy Giuliani, the latest addition to Trump's legal team, has been the guy who leaked these White House questions. It's part of his effort to try to wrap up the whole investigation, I guess. But I think it only drags things out as Mueller tries to game out whether he'll be able to depose or interview or force Trump to testify. Alan Dershowitz, who's been giving Trump free advice over dinner and on television, said it would be dangerous and unwise for the president to agree to an interview. And on this, Dersh and I agree. The strategy is to throw him softballs so that he'll go on with his answers instead of sharp questions designed to elicit yes or no. They make him feel very comfortable and let him ramble. And now Trump, who said it was disgraceful that this list was leaked by people close to him, well, they plan to point to the list as evidence that Mueller has strayed beyond his mandate and is overreaching. One unnamed Trump advisor, speaking to the Washington Post, said Mueller is in Kenny Starr territory now, referring to how the controversial independent counsel investigation of Bill Clinton's real estate deals in Arkansas ended up examining his lies about his sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky. And it is fair to say, and I have been pointing this out, that we were told Mueller was going to investigate if the DNC had been hacked by Fancy Bear and others in Russia. And he was going to investigate if the material that was grabbed there was handed off by Russian actors to WikiLeaks. But as I pointed out yesterday, those explicit aspects of the early investigation do not appear in the questions or the general topics that are apparently proposed by Mueller for discussion with Trump. So this is a very messy situation. And my buddies, Ray McGovern and Bill Binney, Ray McGovern spent years at the CIA. He gave Reagan his daily briefings. Bill Binney spent some 36 years working in military intelligence and at the NSA, where he retired as the worldwide technical director. These guys know their stuff. And they wrote a piece that I'm linking to at Consortium News today, Robert Mueller, Gone Fishing. The opening lines, after a year of investigating whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia, Special Counsel Mueller has in effect admitted that he has hit a dry well. He is under strong pressure to keep the charade going until the November elections, however, so he and his high-priced legal brain trust have devised a new tactic. That's when they refer to the list of questions that has been released. They say, given Trump's temperament and his dismissive attitude toward his legal advisors, Trump might just rise to the bait. And it is fair to say the fishing expedition frame is accurate here. As I just pointed out, the original threads of the investigation are not part of the current discussion. And McGovern and Binney write, never before has it been clearer that the Mueller investigation is 90% charade. Mueller knows better than anyone where and how to find the dirt on the Trump campaign. That he has been able to come up with so little and is trying to get some help from the president himself speaks volumes. If there were tangible evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, Mueller would almost certainly have known where to look, and in today's world of blanket surveillance would have found it by now. It beggars belief that he would have failed, in the course of his year-old investigation, to use all the levers at his disposal to get the goods on Trump. Then they talk about the worldwide collection by the NSA and other arms of the intelligence community. They talk about parallel construction, where to avoid disclosing the illicit methods that were used to capture evidence, they recreate it without the tainted tactics. And they write, finally, performing surveillance on anyone in the Trump campaign or in his administration would mean that NSA, FBI, CIA could legally spy on everyone associated with the Trump administration, even retroactively, going back to before the campaign began. This means Mueller could have access to all of the answers before he even asks Trump the first question. It's a provocative piece. I hope you'll read it. And if you have any comments, drop me a note, peter@peterbcollins.com. So I mentioned that Ty Cobb is exiting. This is called a retirement from the White House. And his replacement is Emmett T. Flood, veteran Washington lawyer who was part of the Bill Clinton impeachment defense team back in '99. And Flood is expected to take a more adversarial approach to the investigation than Cobb has. And Flood was approached last year, but declined to get on the Trump team because Mark Kasowitz was still a part of it, and those two apparently don't get along. So we'll see if there is a different tone, and if the hiring of Emmett Flood along with Rudy Giuliani makes any difference in the course of these events. At the Washington Post today, I was offended by a patronizing op-ed under the byline of Molly Roberts. And she's trying to pander to moderate Democrats and peel off the Bernie left and people like me who are even further left and supported Jill Stein for president in 2016. And my vote for Jill Stein was a protest vote. I knew she couldn't win. And, I don't fully believe that she is ready for prime time. That said, I support the Green Party. I want to see it flourish. And since I could not in good conscience vote for Hillary Clinton, I chose to direct my vote to the Green Party in 16. And as you heard in my news and comment on Monday, go back to it if you haven't already, Jill Stein made a very strong statement that we read liberally from and also linked to, where she described the various efforts to manipulate the 2016 election by Americans. And she called for an emergency effort to protect our voting systems, not just from Russians, but from American Republicans. And she's getting really dinged by this Molly Roberts. She said that Stein repeated what some call a Russian talking point, that we interfere in the elections of other countries. And this is a really dangerous piece of demagoguery. They're trying to enforce groupthink, orthodoxy, consensus, and they're saying that it's out of bounds to acknowledge that the U.S. has interfered in the elections of other countries, including Russia. Anyway, Roberts goes on to criticize Jill Stein, that she defended her campaign's refusal to hand over to congressional intelligence committees documents covering internal discussions that she says are protected by the Constitution. Detractors and defenders leaped immediately into action, the former accusing Stein of being little better than a Russian agent, and the latter bemoaning the media's propagandistic repression of dissenting voices. See how she takes the extremes to just basically dismiss the merits of Jill Stein's comments? And of course, these are unnamed critics. They're just some people say on the right and some people say on the left. But she continues. The further left you go, the more skepticism about the obsession over Special Counsel Mueller's probe and Congress's concomitant investigations you'll find. The problem is playing down the Russia story doesn't actually serve the interests of the fringe left any more than it does the centers. Well, I know you know that I disagree. I'll read more. Many of Stein's supporters and some of Sanders' too see a series of reasons to be wary of the Russian fervor. And later in the article, she acknowledges that that's reasonable. It's irresponsible, she says, to spend every day hand-wringing over Russia and no time at all soul-searching about where progressive politics need to go for a left-leaning coalition to reclaim the White House. She calls Stein she calls Stein's critique hypocritical because Stein has said that Russia's actions in 2016 wasn't really anything new. And so this is an effort to smear Jill Stein by appealing to centrist Democrats who are afraid of the Green Party, who believe all the Russia bullshit, and I find it a very offensive piece. It's linked to for your perusal as well. No tears will be shed as the announcement has been made that Cambridge Analytica is going out of business. That was just a front anyway for a British firm, which is called SCL Elections, and its Canadian auxiliary. And, of course, it was propped up with millions from the Mercer family, and Steve Bannon was put on the board. And so it's not a surprise that it has collapsed, but it will close a particular chapter. Oh, and part of the Manafort investigation has been shut down, but not by Mueller, and not in the United States. There are at least 4 investigations of Mr. Manafort underway in Ukraine, where he once fleeced millions of dollars from the kleptocratic ruler Yanukovych. And the Poroshenko government, Petro Poroshenko, is America's hand-picked. He made millions in the candy business. He has decided to put the brakes on the investigations into Manafort in order to keep the arms flowing from the Trump administration into Ukraine. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Patrick Garay, Faith Peoples, Margaret Anderson just renewed her annual subscription. Thank you, Margaret. And Susan Lundgren is a longtime $10 a month contributor to this podcast. I'd like you to step up and match their support. Visit peterbcollins.com. You click on the menu button, then click on Become a Subscriber. It lands you on the sign-up page, and you can take care of business right there. If you don't like PayPal, you can communicate using the U.S. mail. We have a great friend, Paul Elsesser, who drops a check in the mail that arrives on the first of every month like clockwork. All you got to do is jot down my P.O. Box. It's Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150-660, San Rafael, 94915. Couple of reports out of Sacramento. Stephon Clark, the unarmed black man who was killed by 7, not 8 bullets from police officers who fired a total of 20 rounds at him in the dark, late at night. It was a very bad scene. And the family hired a pathologist who conducted their own autopsy, and now the law enforcement officials in Sacramento have issued the official coroner's report, and in a breach of professionalism, they are claiming inaccuracies and false information in the previous private autopsy that was conducted by Dr. Bennett Omalu. And the bottom line for me is that the cops are looking for any way they can to build some defense for these cops. And I think they did indefensible acts, including turning off the audio on their body cams after the shooting occurred and allowing him to lie on the ground for a very long time before they even approached him to see if he was still alive or allowed medical attention for Stephon Clark. Also in Sacramento, the district attorney who's up for election, her name is Anne Marie Schubert. Well, she is running on the break in a cold case the so-called Golden State Killer case. And I believe that this is going to carry her into a new term, into re-election, because a lot of the white voters in Sacramento won't care as much about Stephon Clark and that injustice as they are at the relief that we're being told the Golden State Killer has been captured and can't kill no mo. But the troubling issues are the way the authorities use the public DNA databases. Now, I will give them credit that they sent a subpoena to get the name from the family tree DNA database of a distant relative of the suspect here, Joseph DeAngelo. But they used a fake profile before they issued the subpoena. And while I do understand that much of this is public information, that people give away their privacy rights when they agree to post their genealogy on a website, I don't think they should, but they do. And I hope that we will see a full review of these practices before it can happen again. Well, predictably, Trump is buying into Netanyahu's PowerPoint presentation the other day, where he used 15-year-old information to declare that Iran lied about its nuclear intentions. But it's interesting because in Europe, the leaders of Britain, France, and Germany don't buy what Netanyahu is saying, and they fundamentally disagree with his conclusion, which is that even if you believe Netanyahu's claim that Iran lied 15 years ago or even in 2009, the agreement is the best way to prevent the unwanted outcome that Israel rails about so much. And now we're seeing Sarah Huckabee Sanders admitted that the White House had discussed the rollout of this new information with the Israelis in advance. So Israel is having this really inappropriate level of influence on American foreign policy, and Trump is a sucker for it. So on the European shores, even Boris Johnson, the wacky foreign secretary of Britain, the Israeli prime minister's presentation underlines the importance of keeping the Iran nuclear deal's constraints on Tehran's nuclear ambitions. The Iran nuclear deal is not based on trust about their intentions. Rather, it is based on tough verification. And the French Foreign Ministry said that the inspection regime under the agreement is one of the most exhaustive and robust in the history of nuclear non-proliferation. Oh, come on, don't let facts get in the way. Trump knows best. He's a stable genius, after all. Back in the fall of 2008, the Bush administration made a big deal about the capture of a man they called the biggest drug kingpin in Afghanistan, Haji Juma Khan. And we learned as he went to trial in New York that he had deep ties and a payroll account with both the CIA and the DEA, and that the government worked very hard to keep that as secret as possible. Well, we don't exactly know when, but last month, Khan was quietly released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons custody. And we don't know where he is, and we don't know the basis for his release because he was sentenced to 20 years and he has served under 10 years. So the suggestion is that he has likely cut a deal. And it shows the ugly flaws in our intelligence efforts and in the war on some drugs. Scott Pruitt is in hot water again, this time more details emerging about a trip he took last December to Morocco, where he was giving advice to the Moroccan government, he says, on questions that they had about an environmental portion of a free trade agreement. But along the way, meetings were set up by one of his old buddies, a lobbyist from Oklahoma named Richard Smotkin. And Smotkin participated in some of the meetings with Pruitt, and he came away with a $40,000 a month foreign agent contract from the government of Morocco, which was inked in April but retroactive to January. So Scott Pruitt's buddies get their pockets lined, and I hope that catches up to Mr. Pruitt. Once again, Republicans in a red state have passed what is obviously an unconstitutional abortion restriction bill. In Iowa, the new legislation bans most abortions when a fetal heartbeat is detected. That's around 6 weeks. And one of the guys, a Republican state senator who voted for this, said this is the avenue to overturn Roe versus Wade, and that a vast majority of the elective abortions that occur in Iowa will be prohibited. Now, I understand what the Republicans are doing. My question is, where are the Democrats? They used to be the party of choice. They stood for a woman's right to choose and the Roe versus Wade decision. But polling shows that's about a 50-50 proposition now, and the Democrats have mostly gone silent. Will this provoke them into action? I fear the answer is no. And finally today, a couple of stories about Facebook. Yesterday, I used the example of the claim, a false news story, that Israel had dropped a tactical nuclear weapon in Syria. And I do hold out the possibility that it could be an accurate report, but I don't have anything to substantiate it with, and so at this point I must conclude that it's not true. But I raised the issues of who gets to decide what is fake, and who gets to decide if, information is leaking out about whether that is trustworthy or not. Well, at the F8 developer conference yesterday, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook said that they are going to ask their users which media outlets they trust. And they're then going to suppress the ones they don't trust or boost the ones they do. Now, this is not transparent. They haven't told us they will share the information from users about this. But this is censorship. Even if it's based on crowdsourcing, even if it's based on all of the members of Facebook getting a vote, it is censorship. And separately, Facebook has agreed to undergo 2 outside audits to address concerns from groups that often don't see eye to eye, civil rights groups and right-wing politicians. So they've created what I consider to be a false equivalency, that Diamond and Silk, these 2 black women who are Trump supporters who feel that Facebook's algorithm adversely impacts them. Let me tell you, Facebook's algorithms really suppress left-wing independent media like the Peter B. Collins podcast. I can see how the limited distribution of my daily posts about today's podcast, that is a function of the filters at Facebook. And I commend the Muslim advocates. They issued a statement. We strongly reject the message this sends regarding the moral equivalency of hate group activities and conservative viewpoints. So Vice News reports that Facebook's hate speech audit will be led by Laura Murphy, a former director of the ACLU's Washington Legislative Office, with support from a D.C.-based law firm that's handled civil rights cases. Murphy will be taking advice from the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights and others. But I don't have confidence since I don't know the criteria that they are using to describe what is hate speech and what is protected First Amendment expression. Now, I would rather see them err on the right of expression as opposed to efforts of censorship. Thanks for listening to this daily news and comment podcast. We give it away free, and you are free to share it with absolutely everyone. You'll find it on YouTube. And become a subscriber there when you visit, please.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.